أعوذ بالله العلي العظيم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. Admit all. Everybody's coming in. Boom, boom, boom. Yes, I'm joining. Still joining. Takes a while. All right. Looks like there's Hussein. Okay. Looks like everybody is here. Before we start today, I got a message from someone who said that they had real trouble following this particular visionary narrative. So what I've done, I've just taken about 5 pages of notes. I'll read this first, and then I'll read our visionary narrative itself. So, a treatise of a day with a group of Sufis, the summary of the treatise. In this treatise, Suhrawardi once more narrates one of his mystical experience in the first person singular I. In a Khanaqah or Sufi lodge hospice, each Sufi speaks about his own master. The narrator recounts the name of his sheikh, the structure of the cosmos, and the arrangement of the 9 heavens, expressed symbolically, and responds to questions about astronomy. The sheikh objects to such questions and teaches that people fall into 3 classes in their view of the heavens: the common people who see only with the physical eye, the astronomers who know the apparent forms and motions of the heavens and stars, the real investigators who attain the inner secret of the heavens. The narrator asks the sheikh to give him a method for perceiving these secrets. The sheikh instructs him to pursue ascetic discipline, retreat, and a 40-day vigil, khalwa or chilla in the Persian word, so that the eye of the heart may open to the unseen world. The treatise is divided into 2 parts. The first part represents symbolically ancient cosmology, especially physics and astronomy. The second part details Suhrawardi's mystical wayfaring as narrated in the voice of his sheikh. The first is brief, the second more elaborate. So the part 1, the symbolic cosmology, Suhrawardi questions revolve around the motion of the planets and heavens, the direction and speed of these motions, the color and light of the 9 spheres, the spheres of air and fire, the falak al-aflaq, the outermost heaven, the stars of the zodiac, the 7 planetary heavens, the intensity of the sun's light, the nature of the spheres, why the moon has no light of its own and borrows from the sun. The symbolic terms include engraver, that he uses the word hakak in the Persian, or Arabic rather, the artisan who inscribes gems and metal. This refers to the pure intellect or angel from whose creation the spheres proceed. Casket is another term he uses. Halqa, a small chest. The 9 caskets equals the 9 heavens. The starless sphere, the zodiacal sphere, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the sun, Venus, Mercury, and the moon in that order. Then substance is covered: Johar, earth and its waters. 2 garments, the spheres of fire and air surrounding the earth, and decorating with designs and gold or adornment, adorning with luminous stars. The second part is about mystical wayfaring, and is divided into 5 sections. The sheikh's complaint. The sheikh, as in Suhrawardi's other allegories that we've already read, the previous ones, the angelic guide, Gabriel, or the active intellect, the 10th intellect, declares the questions inappropriate. So this sheikh, throughout this entire visionary treatise, is in fact another representation of the active intellect of the archangel Gabriel, the angel of humanity. So the sheikh declares the questions asked by his murid as inappropriate. He says they are trivial and easily answered. What matters is not natural sciences, but illumination, ishraq, and the mystical discipline, the riyadha. The disciple is taught that felicity lies not in astronomy or mathematics, but in spiritual wayfaring. Then the second part treats the issue of the 3 approaches to the heavens. The sheikh explains these 3 modes as: first, the sensory gaze, common people who see a blue vault with white points. The second, or the astronomer's gaze, concerned with calculations, zodiacal houses, planetary conjunctions, especially Saturn and Jupiter, dividing the zodiac into fiery, earthy, airy, and watery signs, and reading horoscopes. And then the final third are the Gnostic verifiers or investigators who seek the inner secret of the heavens beyond sense and science, beholding the inward realities. The disciple's earlier questions belong to the second type. The sheikh urges him to ascend to the third. The third part is the obstacles to the mystical ascent. The disciple laments his inability. The sheikh prescribes purification, tazkiyah. He says to him something to the effect, and translating from the Farsi now, "You're full, go abstain for 40 days, then take a purgative so that you may vomit and your sight may open." Suhrawardi equates spiritual attachment to worldliness with the ancient medical notion of imtila, repletion or excess humors. This is from the Galenic medicine. Just as medicine requires purging, so the soul requires purification by asceticism. The sheikh explains the purgative is within. Relinquish whatever is dearest, wealth, possessions, pleasures. For 40 days, subsist on meager lawful food taken without anyone's covetous gaze. Even lawful food becomes an obstacle if the needy look upon it while you withhold it. Sufism is not antisocial monasticism. There's no monasticism in Islam, la Rahmaniya fi Islam, but detachment while still living amongst people, which the Naqshbandis have popularized by the term khalvat and juman. If after 40 days the medicine works, the inner eye opens. If not, repeat. But if after 3 attempts one still clings to the world, he's like a dog preoccupied with his own filth, incurable. The mystical vision is the fourth part. When the inner eye opens, the outer eyes and lips must be closed. One must silence outward senses and awaken inward faculties so that one sees, hears, tastes, and smells with the inner senses, perceiving the unseen realm. This state cannot be described. It is tasted or dhawq, knowledge by presence, ilm-huduri, not by acquisition. Few attain it. Few attain it for renouncing the world. Few attaining for renouncing the world is rare accomplishment. Here, the Quran's vision of Abraham beholding the Malakut in 675 is echoed. The hadith of Qurb al-Nawafil, when I love him, I am his hearing, his sight, his tongue, his hand, his foot, etc., illustrates the mystical station. This is the illuminationist gnosis to perceive with divine senses. Part 5 covers the joy of solitude and ineffability. The sheikh contrasts worldly intoxication with the ecstasy of mystical solitude. The Gnostic mounts the steed of contemplation and gallops in the field of unseen knowledge. Such a one appears mad to the ignorant, but truly he is absorbed in realities beyond them. The disciple then concludes, "I told my companions what my sheikh had said. They said, 'You have a noble sheikh who hides nothing from you.' I replied, 'He hides nothing, but he reveals what I cannot express.'" Mystical secrets cannot be divulged to the masses, as the fate of Hallaj showed. Suhrawardi himself alludes to this peril here. If he speaks, the sword and gallows await. If he is silent, he is crushed by the burden. So the treatise juxtaposes symbolic cosmology, ancient science recast in allegory, with mystical epistemology, true knowledge as direct illumination, ishraq. The 3 kinds of people, laymen, astronomers, Gnostics, encapsulate Suhrawardi's hierarchy of knowledge: sensory, rational, illuminative, or doxa, ratio, and noesis in the Platonic way that we have it in the dialogues of Plato. The use of medical imagery, purging humors, illustrates the Ishraqi method. Inner health requires eliminating worldly attachments. This text affirms that illumination cannot be taught discursively. It must be tasted, dhawq. And finally, Suhrawardi foreshadows his own fate in Hallaj's mystical truths expressed openly invite worldly persecution. So that was my notes on this particular visionary narrative, and now we are going to read it, which is actually a short treatise because compared to the other ones. And then afterwards, I will obviously open the floor to our discussion. So, a day with a group of Sufis, Ruzi ba Jama'at Sufiyan, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. One day, I sat with a group of Sufis in a Chanukah. Each one of us was reading one of his master's lectures. When my turn came, I said that when I was seated before my master, I had said to him, "Today I was passing through the engraver's lane and saw an engraver with a wheel in front of him and a jewel in his hand. From the jewel, he was making a bead in the shape of a round ball. I thought, if this wheel, which is turning vertically, were to turn horizontally to the ground like a millstone, and the engraver were to place a bead on the wheel and take his hand away, would the bead have any notion, or would the bead have any motion from the motion of the wheel or not? I was unable to fathom this mystery." My master said, "The bead on the wheel would turn against the rotation of the wheel, such that if the wheel were turning from left to right, the bead would remove from right to left. It would be just as when you take a board and place a ball on it and then jerk the board towards yourself. The board comes towards you, but the ball moves away from you and rolls to the farther end of the ball." This is very standard Aristotelian physics that is being deployed by Suhrawardi for the purposes of his next couple of points that are coming. "If there were 10 or more beads on the wheel, would their motion be equal or not?" I asked. He replied, "If you drew 10 lines on the wheel such that the lines were paths for the beads to spin on, and if the beads would not come off their lines when placed, then if you were to place a bead on each line and spin the wheel, the bead that was closest to the center would return the soonest to the point from which it started. The farther the beads were from the center, the slower they would be returning. This is provided that the beads be of equal size, for a smaller bead would be slower in returning than a larger one, because a bead that is, say, 10 times smaller than a larger one will spend 10 times for the large beads once." I said to my master, "The engraver's craft is amazing. There's a well-known tale in their craft," my master said, "but no one tells it fully and no one knows the meaning of it." "What is this tale?" I asked. "Once an engraver had a jewel. He wanted to display his skill on it. From it, he made a round shell like a ball. Then from the residue left in the middle of the shell, he made another shell inside the first. Again, from the residue of the second, he made a third, and so on until he made 9 shells. Afterwards, from the remainder of these shells, he made a jewel, which he wrapped in 2 pieces of cloth, one of which had no color and the other of which was whitish. These he placed in the middle of the shells. He then polished the first shell and engraved a few medallions on the second shell and gilded it. On the third, fourth, and so on to the 9th shells, he engraved 1 medallion each, and he gilded all of them except the medallion of the 9th shell. Then he put the polished shells on a turning device. It revolved from left to right, and the medallions on the shells revolved from right to left. And they were such that if anyone were to look from outside the 9th shell, he would see straight through to the first and think that it was all one shell, and that all the medallions were engraved on one shell. Because of the extreme motion of the shells, the jewel that was in the pieces of cloth in the center of the shells stood suspended such that it was equally inclined to all the direction within the shell." When I heard this from my master, I said, "It seems that I'm also inside that shell. Nonetheless, I do not understand what you're saying to me. Tell me clearly that I may benefit fully." My master said, "When the Creator created these spheres, he sent the light to the first spheres as an adornment. The first sphere was too subtle to bear it, because a sphere in the intermediary between being and..." Let me read that again. "The first sphere was too subtle to bear it, because a sphere is an intermediary between being and non-being. On the one hand, it borders on existence, while on the other, it is contiguous with non-existence. Therefore, between existence and non-existence, there's this thing that, with regard to form, is nearly nothing yet. With regard to attribute, is more thing than anything else. It is rather like air, which you do not regard as anything because it is too subtle to have the power to carry so much as an atom. And if I were to give an Akbarian gloss on this, I think this explanation right here would be one of the most lucid explanation of what an Ain Athabit is, what a single immutable archetypal entity is. The first sphere, being so close to the nothingness that is the other world and more subtle than anything yet, was unable to bear the light on account of its subtlety. And so the light reached the second sphere, which was capable of bearing it. The light was broken up against the second sphere, and every part became a star. What was left over from these stars came to the third sphere, and from that residue, Saturn came into being. Again, what was left over from Saturn reached the fourth sphere, and the body of Jupiter came into being, and so on. Mars from the residue of Jupiter, the Sun from the residue of Mars, Venus from the residue of the Sun, Mercury from the residue of Venus, and from the residue of Mercury, the Moon. This is very standard, ancient astronomical, hierarchy. I mean, there are different iterations of it. We saw that in the chapter of Idris, Ibn Arabi himself had reconfigured all of this trajectory a little differently. Why is the body of the sun bigger and brighter than the others, I asked. Because it is in the middle, he said. If you count the 7 planets, the sun is in the middle. And just as there are 2 spheres above the heaven, there are 2 other spheres below them, Ether and Zamharir. Zamharir is a Quranic term that occurs in the Quran, and it expresses serious coldness. Therefore, by any reckoning, the sun is in the middle. If water flowing on a plain cannot proceed in a certain direction because of a stone or hard ground, and if the 2 sides of the water are constrained, the depth of the water will increase because there is a resistance. And where resistance is, there is where force is. It is for this reason that the sun is bigger and brighter. Why are the stars on the second sphere not very bright, I asked, seeing that there are many stars there? It is there that the light reached first, and all the other stars are from the residue of those stars. The second sphere is near the first sphere, he said. It too does not have much force. A model of the spheres would be as follows. Say someone wants to draw semicircles in the shape of the celestial spheres. First, he makes a dot. Let it be blue, red, green, or whatever color he wants. Let's say it's blue. After he makes the dot, he mixes a bit of white color with the blue and draws a line over the first, and every time he draws a line, he adds white until there is no blue at all. Thus, he will have gradually gone from blue to white. Now, assume that the Earth is the blue dot, and that each sphere in ascending order becomes progressively whiter until the first sphere will be so little blue that the line above it will be completely white. What we mean by white is subtlety, not color. The second sphere, being near the first, is subtle, and its stars are also subtle like water, which takes on the color of any vessel it is poured into. Since the second sphere has so little strength, its stars are not very strong either. I asked my master, why are there many stars on the second sphere and only one on each of the others? He answered, if you take a big plate and put a few handfuls of quicksilver on it, then find the center of the plate and put something underneath so that it can be spun, the quicksilver will break up into small pieces if there is enough of it. If then you put the small pieces on a small plate and spin it, the pieces will coalesce through the motion of the small plate. The spheres are just like that. The second sphere received the light from the first sphere, and since its areas was large and the light necessarily broke up. The area of each sphere down was less, and the light too was less, so it of necessity coalesced into one. Why does the moon have no light? I asked my master. He says, every star that exists is between 2 spheres, he said, and the light of the stars is reinforced by the sphere. A star on a sphere is like the vital force in the human body, i.e., the vital force is reinforced by the bodily strength and vice versa. However, the side of the moon that is toward the earth is void of a sphere. The two spheres that are there are connected to the elemental world, just as subtlety dominates in the first and second spheres. Gravity is dominant in these two, after the example of the celestial semicircles we have just given. In descending order, these two spheres have a greater relation to blue than to white, while the first and second spheres have a greater relation to white than to blue. By white and blue, we mean subtlety and gravity. Since the sphere of the sun is in the middle, which is the position of equilibrium between subtlety and gravity, the sun received the full measure of light and the moon was deprived altogether. If the moon is not the locus of light, I said, then why can't the light of the sun be seen in it? Why can't the sun, let me read that again. If the moon is not a locus of light, I said, then why can the light of the sun be seen in it? If the sun's rays strike a mirror, a crystal ball, or the like, he said, its light is apparent and is radiated just like the orb of the sun. Now, these things are loci and receptacle for the sun's light. So too is the moon, only more so. Such questions and answers having been exchanged between us, my master said, these questions were all beside the point. It is not necessary for anyone to ask why one star gives light and another not, or why there's a lot of light in one place and little in another. Anyone who has progressed this far would question why the spheres are not 15 or 11, or why they spin at all, or why they do not go astray. He will be told that this is how things are, that it is not necessary for the secret to be told. He who knows, knows. How can one know, I asked. Those who look at the heavens and stars can be divided into three groups, he said. The first group looks with the physical eye and sees a blue plain with few white spots. These are the common people, and the beasts have the ability to see as much. The second group looks at the heavens through the eyes of the heavens. These are astrologers. The eyes of the heavens are the stars, and through them they gaze upon the heavens. They say that today such and such a star is in such and such a house, and that its influence will be thus and so. In such and such a house, such and such a conjunction is occurring. The house is in an air sign or an earth sign or a fire sign. It is the first conjunction, air dominates or water prevails. In such and such a year, when the sun was entering Aries, such and such a sign was rising, the ascendant of the year was such and such. When so-and-so was born, such and such a constellation was rising, and that is his ascendant. He is ruled by such and such a planet, which works to give him a good life. At such and such a time, the dragon's tailed node stands in front of the sun or in front of the moon. The sun or moon turns black. They calculate the stars. They see the heavens through the eyes of heaven. Finally, those who seek the secret of the heavens and stars, not with the physical eye or through the eyes of heaven, but through the eye of logic, they are the people of reality. I have not attained that vantage point, I said. What should I do? You're too full, he said. Go and fast for 40 days. After that, take a purgative to void yourself. Perhaps your eyes will be opened. What is the prescription for the purgative, I asked. The ingredients will come from yourself, he answered. What are the ingredients, I asked. Whatever is dear to you, he said. Possessions, property, material things, psychological and carnal pleasures. I would also add family. Such things are the ingredients for the purgative. Go and content yourself for 40 days with a little agreeable food in which there's no suspicion of pollution and upon which no one else has designs. Then put these ingredients into the mortar of trust and grind them up with the pestle of desire. Make of it a purgative and swallow it down in one gulp. If you have to go to the bathroom soon, the medicine will have been effective and your eyes will quickly be opened. If you do not have to go, the medicine will not have taken effect. Go and abstain for 40 days more and take the same purgative again. Hopefully, it will work this time. If it does not, keep taking it over and over again until it does its job. However, if anyone acts like a dog, circling around his own excrement and getting involved again with the same ingredients from which the purgative was made, and which by doing its job became excrement, he will have a relapse and the pain will reappear. And this no doctor will be able to cure. I asked my master, when the eye is open, what will the viewer see? He said, when the inner eye is open, the outer eye should be sealed to everything. The lips shut to everything, and the five external senses should cease to be used, and the internal senses employed in their place, such that when the patient wants to hold something, he should hold it with his inner hand. When he wants to see something, he should see it with his inner eye. When he wants to hear something, he should hear it with his inner ear. And when he wants to smell something, he should smell it with his inner nose. And his sense of taste should come from the soul's palate. This is a reiteration of that hadith, the Qurban Nawafil, that I mentioned before. Once this is accomplished, he can regard the secret of the heavens continually and be informed at every moment from the world of the unseen. You have asked what he will see. He will see what he sees and should see. He will not be able to relate the things that are brought into his view, but he will be able to know them through his own intuitive experience. Few people achieve this state because it is difficult for the unworthy to abandon this world, and the worthy are but few. A drunkard wakes every morning from the realm of drunkenness in need of a drink. The force of excess in wine weakens his brain, and he whose brain is weak is too timid to do anything. He may reject what he has done and say to himself, I should give up this decadence and return to God, for there lies success in both this world and the next. Now, his idea is correct, but when night comes, he will have been drawn heedlessly to the tavern and gotten drunk again. In his drunkenness, he says, what was I thinking this morning? What I was thinking this morning was nonsense. The world is drunkenness. To abandon the world is like that. Heedlessness steps forward and does not allow one to go the right way. It continually keeps worldlings drunk with the wine of self-satisfaction or ego. If, however, one realizes the pleasure of retreat to isolation and exchanges not being adamiyah for being wujud, then he can mount the steed of contemplation and ride into the field of knowledge of the unseen. He will so take delight in the unseen things that he will not be able to describe his state and will abandon the state of humanity. The mad call such a one mad. If he were to come near you, so you too would call it what he does. He is not bothered by your opinion, however, for there he is unconcerned with you. When I had told these words of my master to the group, they said, you have a great master. So compassionate to you is he that he has not concealed any secret from you. He conceals nothing from me, I said. Yet what he says, I cannot repeat. If I speak, it means the sword or the gallows. If I do not speak, I am left in hopeless straits. And that was a day with a group of Sufis, of Suhrawardi Suhrawardi. And now, all open to you guys, whatever questions you may have. Go for it. Riaz, if you want to talk first.
Okay, sure. Thank you for reading that. It was really good. I'd just like to point out that it starts off by talking about how a bunch of Sufis are in a gathering, and we're reading the master's lectures. That's kind of what we're doing, where you're reading the master's lectures. So I thought that was kind of funny. You're reading that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's us. Anyway. So he walks in and he sees this engraver's lane, and he sees the engraver with the wheel and a jewel in his hand. How come it passes into his head to transpose this wheel? Like, why is that something that would
Because this then
pop
is
into their head?
the process of what the intellects actually do. He then gets into, so he's allegorizing the creative process of these various intellects that then becomes the subject of the conversation right after it. But this is in it's an allegory of what that process looks like on a below level as a kind of an example.
Okay, I see. And what would the original thing that the engraver is doing when the wheel is vertical as opposed to being like?
Well, the
That.
vertical wheel is the descent of the emanations of
Okay.
creation from one realm to the other. And the vertical would be the actual process of creation on each specific realm itself.
I see. I see. Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, that was my question.
Anybody else? Jeff?
For starters, it was said at one time that the the cosmology that's described in the introduction is backwards or upside down. I'm not exactly sure how. Can we revisit that thought? And it doesn't matter. I mean, first of all, I should say that it really doesn't matter. But I'm just curious because every time I read one of these treatises now, I've got that stuck in the back of my mind. I'm trying to figure figure it out.
I would invoke the words of the Sheikh in the last part because the point of this exercise is not which model of the cosmology is correct or not. This is what he's trying to tell him.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have multiple cosmological models or astronomical and astrological models, right? And this is what he's pointing out when he's talking about the astrologers that they're fixated on modeling, right?
Yeah.
And that is not the point of the exercise. That's kind of being veiled as far as Suhrawardi is concerned. It has its place, but ultimately that's not where it's at. So what he's trying to tell us here is he's pushing us into the allegorization of the cosmological models itself. That's the point of that discussion, rather than to actually be fixated on a specific model of things.
Right. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. Yeah, exactly. So that's why I say it doesn't really matter what the answer to that is.
Yeah.
But it does it does occur to me. It's just a nagging question that really has not very much consequence.
Hmm. Don't be too bothered by that.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the good thing about Suhrawardi. He's taking material from every known branch of knowledge in his time and then trying to re-narrate that into his aim in presenting his model, his
right,
illuminationist perspective.
right. And but as you mentioned with Ibn Arabi, there's a slightly different model anyways,
Yeah,
right? So, and from source to source,
yeah.
we're going to see variation.
But one thing that he's very consistent about throughout all these visionary treatises is that he's putting everything in the first person narrator, right? But the protagonist, the main protagonist of all these narrations is the alter ego. Whether he casts that as his perfect nature or whether he casts that in the form of a Sufi sheikh who then is basically stand-in for the 10th intellect or active intellect and the archangel Gabriel. This is the constant. And
Right.
so then it becomes the dialogue, the whole unfolding of the dialogues is starting from the premises of what is known, then moving on to the higher noetic framework of things.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Hussein, Hassan?
Okay, I will continue. So, first of little follow-up on the question of Jeff. Can we say that the astronomic model of Suhrawardi is factually correct? What I mean that it doesn't matter that, according to contemporary astronomy, the sun is in the center, then the other planets, and so on. What do I mean? That from our point of view, we live in the Earth, and we are here the heroes of the story, and
Yeah.
from our point of view the center is the earth, then are the other planets. So that is expression what we get when we look at the skies, and that is the viewpoint which is most effective for us to get for astronomical, astrological, and other purposes.
That's very true. But he does something extremely interesting in his prayers. The Wada Dattva Tattisa, especially the prayers to the days and planetary intelligences. The very first prayer that begins for these planetary intelligence, and the longest of them out of the other six, is the prayer to the sun. So when you read that, what he does there, when you read that between the lines, even though here, for example, he's laying out a model of the universe that is not heliocentric in the way that we understand that concept today, but in his prayers, he is centering the sun as the center of the universe, or at the center of the seen universe. Where Hurach, as the way he terms it, the sun, the angel or the archangelic intelligence of the sun, is the first and center of all these other six planetary intelligence that flow from it. And it's the longest one out of all of them, out of all the prayers. So I found that extremely interesting, because it shows to me that a number of things are going on. Number one, that Suhrawardi sort of subtly subscribed to a sort of heliocentric model, but for a very interesting reason, is because the symbol of the sun in the Mazdian and Zoroastrian faith is very central to their creed. And so part of Suhrawardi's project was to align his reading of metaphysics, Islamic metaphysics, in light of a Zoroastrian or Neo-Zoroastrian narrative. So then he kind of does this recentering thing process within his prayers. And he also drops a few clues to that effect later when we start to read the Hikmet al-Ishraq. Because what is this? The sun is, at least in the time that what was known of the sun represents the immediate symbol of light, right? So in Suhrawardi's metaphysical and cosmological reasoning, right, this must be at the center of things and not these other celestial bodies that are far away.
Because I kind of felt this internal contradiction. That from the viewpoint of illumination, the sun is the biggest, the most important, and so on. But in terms of volume of hierarchy, the first sphere is invisible one,
Yeah.
then next, and sun is just somewhere in the middle.
You put your finger on another important point. Suhrawardi doesn't compose a separate litany of prayers for these celestial bodies beyond the sun. What he does instead is he very subtly and very briefly invokes them in his very first prayer before he begins the prayer to the planets, to God, to the Godhead, which he Arabizes. He doesn't call him Allah. He uses a very old Zoroastrian term, Ormaz Datar Kehan. Ahura Mazda, the Lord of the universe, right? And that is very interesting. And the whole prayer is in Arabic, but he uses that Mazdian term rather than Allah. So this is another reason I think that we need to take this statement here as sort of an argument, not as an axiom. So the Sheikh is arguing a position and he's laying out this cosmological model that was prevalent in Suhrawardi's time, right? But that is not axiomatic with Suhrawardi's illuminationist cosmology. It's just the point that is being made in this statement, referring to contemporary astrological and cosmological models. Yeah.
Yes, that's another thing because when I read the treatises and the other works of Shaykhul Ishraq, I somehow I am in perplexity. What is his vantage point? That, for example, in the treatise or in the works, he just relays the Aristotelic viewpoint, or he's speaking about his own view, or some intermediary between them. Always, I should be very careful whose position he is expressing right
Yeah,
at the moment.
but if you when you one reads carefully, although Thaxton has done a relative, I think Thaxton has generally done a good job in capturing some of the nuances. The language has its limits, so you can't express a lot of the nuances in the Persian that is very obvious to someone who's reading it. But I think by and large, Thaxton does a very good job in translating and kind of trying to convey as best as possible some of these very subtle nuances in this and the other visionary treatises. So I think that it's very important to read these treatises very carefully and slowly to try to digest the nuance of the argument that is being made and where it's coming from. It works on you if you do it that way. Yeah.
Uh, okay. Those were my follow-up question. Now my own question, if you allow me. Uh, uh, when he says the first sphere was too subtle to bear it, because a sphere is an intermediary between a being and non-being. So he start with the first sphere, but does this statement at page 35, somewhere in the middle, uh, does this rule encompass all the spheres? What I mean, that every one of the spheres is in its own terms an intermediary between being and non-being
Yep.
in different degrees, but the principle is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, yeah, that's the case. Yeah.
Okay, and you, while reading, also made a very interesting comment on it. A little bit further, the same page, the first sphere being so close to the nothingness, that is the other world, and so on. But we have again the symbol of the two wings of Gabriel, one to the
That's symbol of Gabriel's womb. But every time I have read that particular section of Suhrawardi, immediately the descriptions that Ibn Arabi starts to give us from the very first chapter of Adam of the Fusus al Hikam about the Ayana Thabita also, because that the situation with them is exactly the same thing. The mutable archetypal essences there. Um, he says, what was it in the chapter after Seth? He says they have not even whiffed, smelled from the taste of existence, right? And Sorowardi is saying the same thing about the spheres, these intellects, right? They are non-existent but existent simultaneously, right?
And this interesting thing that I was expecting that he will say the opposite, that the nothingness is closer to the center, to the earth, to
Yes.
the material.
Yeah.
But actually, as you say, he's repeating Sheikh al-Akbar, his...
So
okay.
just before we move on to your next point, this point that you just made is extremely subtle and important. That the nothingness, positive nothingness, rather than negativity or privation, this kind of nothingness, adamia, is an extremely subtle point to understand why it is important, because that nothingness then positions its generator, Allah, or the spirit or intellect of it, as the real actor, right? And this is what I was meaning last week when I was saying that, in my reading of this whole situation of what the Akbarians talk about the nature of the immutable archetypal essences to God, if we look at God as the matter of these essences, right, then what these essences are begin to take on more digestible and become a little bit clear as to what is going on. So when we say that, for example, a particular sphere or a particular essence is nothingness, it is nothingness is in relation to its progenitor, who is its main actor. So that nothingness tells us that this thing has no independent existential will of being apart from that which it comes from. Right? And this then now situates that relationship in a kind of a much more clear and a profounder way to understand what this relationship actually means.
Okay, just to check if I understand you correctly. In other words, we can say that their huwiyya is so close to the huwiyya of Allah Ta'ala that they are not separate
Well,
entities.
when their huwiyah is so close to the huwiyah of Allah, that means that their huwiyah is non-existent because the huwiyah is the huwiyah of Allah. And so the further that their identity, their tashakkhus, becomes refined, the further removed they are and the more real they become in the sense of independence from that first principle, right? So in a sense, now this is kind of a backwards kind of argument to what we were talking about last week, right? And this kind of shows this whole holographic way of looking at each of these different situations that change their positions in light of which perspective you're kind of coming at them from, right?
Okay, okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Now, just allow me a couple of more questions. Uh, so, the next one, when he says it is not necessary for anyone to ask this question, let's say about astronomy. Again, what does he mean? Does he mean that someone can just go to the real thing, to the suluk, to the illumination, and so on, or he is more in line with the Ismailis? What we should go to the three levels: the copy paste first level, the second level, which is the rational, and the third, which is the noesis, for example.
All of these are happening at the same time, but he's also expressing that the real thing cannot be expressed. It's ineffable. That language kind of falls from the ability to truly capture and articulate the essences of these things as they are, as they're perceived, even in the even in the illumination. And so the approximation of description then becomes allegory. So this is also a function of why allegory is used by Suhrawardi, because allegory, articulating these sorts of situations through allegory, at the very beginning is saying that ultimately you cannot express these things, and so what allegory is seeking to do is to approximate, to orient. So once the subject is oriented, then if they actually move into that terrain, they get to see it for themselves. If that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Sadie. For
Sure.
now, I will give the stage for the others and
Sure.
may return in the end of the session.
No worries. Hossein. Whoop. You froze. Hossein froze immediately. He's still with us. He was saying that his internet connection wasn't all that great. Too bad. All right. How about somebody else? Nate, do you have anything you want to add or Nathan is not serious. No? Yes? Hussein, you're back?
I'm back.
Okay.
Um,
Good.
Sorry about that.
No worries. No problem.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was going to touch on, picking up on this question, where he answers all of his questions, and then he says these questions were all beside the point. It seems a little more complex than that because of the function, the allegorical function of the cosmology, right? I was thinking like this whole thing is it's a symbolic cosmology, like in the other recitals.
Yeah.
So maybe, I thought maybe what he means is don't get too caught up in the details.
Yeah,
because,
he's 100% saying this. Yeah, don't get caught up in the details. Because if you get caught up in the details, you can't move beyond them. You get stuck.
Mhm.
Which then kind of going back to some of the treatises that we've read in the last couple of weeks. Remember in the first one, the treatise of the birds, where he's describing the movement of the birds towards the highest peak of that range to meet the King of Kings. He says that there are, these different peaks or different realms that it's very easy to get trapped into for the birds. So let's transpose that symbolism now into details of sciences, right? People get interested in the Gnostic path, mystical path, or whatever, and they read and read and read and engage, and they get caught in the discursive details rather than actually do it themselves to have that kind of experience, right? So just as the example that he's making that these rationalists or astronomers or astrologers get caught in the details of their own craft. This is kind of telling us that this can happen in any kind of discursive endeavor about getting knowledge of things as they truly are. So reading about gnosis is not the el mahuduri, it's not the presential knowledge. It's a discursive exercise that, maybe orients you and shows you things and gets you to understand, but it's not the real thing itself yet until you move to the next step. The third, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And related to this, it seems like although this is astronomy and astrology at the same time, because it's symbolic, it's like it seems to almost be kind of in the middle somewhere. Like it is a literal sort of Aristotelian Ptolemaic cosmology, but the cosmology itself is already sort of speaking in symbolic terms.
Exactly.
And then this idea of going beyond it too. It's my question there is, are we going beyond it into the purely intellectual, or is going beyond also going into the imaginal? Like there seems to be this kind of
well, at that point when you go beyond it, the intellectual and the imaginal collapse because you've then entered the real intelligible universe, right? When we say, the imaginal world is a place where bodies are spiritualized and spirits are corporealized. Another way to reconfigure that statement that Faiza Kashani says is that realm is a purely intelligible universe, intelligible, but in a animate, imaginary form, such that all these various paradoxical forms that we beheld, whether in dreams or visions or entheogenic experiences or whatever, are imagined intelligibilities or intelligible imaginations is another way to put it. They might not be logical in a kind of a two-dimensional discursive sense, but that doesn't obviate their intelligibility. I mean, they're not going to present themselves as syllogisms with premises, first and second term and conclusion, right? They present their intelligibility in another way, in a higher kind of abstract, but yet simultaneously very tangible kind of way.
Okay. So it's really what's really interesting about this, starting with or these three categories, starting with the people who just look at the sky, and then the astronomers, and then the Gnostics are described as the ones who know the secrets of the heavens. And so I guess all the recitals are saying this, but here it's made really explicit that like metaphysics for Suhrawardi is esoteric astrology.
Yeah.
That whatever is in the world of light is just going to be a kind of higher image of what we're seeing in the sky.
Yeah.
And that's where the symbolism comes in. Even the concept of like influences, that there is a kind of noetic earth that is receiving influences from noetic planets and noetic spheres and all of this. And so whatever we find there is going to be some kind of higher version of the universe itself.
What you just said is made explicit in these prayers to the planetary intelligences. And this is a detail that really bugs me that someone like Walbridge misses or kind of minimizes and trivializes, is because that is exactly he makes this point as explicit as it could possibly get in those prayers. So then when you read, for example, the prayers back into this treatise and then later on in certain parts of the Hikmet al-Ishraq itself, what we see is that the point of the first section of the Hikmet al-Ishraq, which deals with logic and epistemology, is basically to rationally prepare you to then step into the next level, which next section of the book, which is metaphysics and mysticism, purely, even when rationalistically expressed in that second part that we're going to read eventually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So I just had a question about this one phrase that he uses, that the translation, it seems so wrong. Where when he's describing the third group, it's those who see through the eye of logic.
Mm-hmm.
And they are the people of reality.
That can be, the word mantek is used in the Persian, but mantek is also speech. Those who see through the eye of speech. Well,
I see nazar. No, nazar istidlal.
Some texts
Nazar.
have nazar. The Nas Korban one has
نظر استدلالي was
yeah.
in
Yeah.
our version.
Yeah, so nazar is kind of a outward, but in the Nas Korban text, and they've glossed also mantek and nazar. So in different manuscripts, there's different wording of this, but I agree with you. Thaxton's translation of nazar or even mantek as logic is misleading. You should have at least footnoted it, which he didn't. So if you read it as it is right there, yeah, it can mislead as to what that means. But people who, in Suhrawardi's diction, who approach these questions from the perspective as nazar, are the Ahl Bahs, are the people of disputation. So he's talking about the philosophers. Okay? But with Suhrawardi's illuminationist project, you have to remember that it is the Ahl Mantiq, Ahl Nazar, who are the ones that, use that as the basis, as the springboard to their then noetic flight and noetic ascension. Right? So remember the very first thing that we will read in the very first opening pages of the Hikmet al-Ishraq, where he's distinguishing between different types of Gnostics. The philosopher who's also simultaneously a Gnostic that has no philosophical training, and then the philosopher who has no noetic and Gnostic inclination. It has to be read in light of that distinction that he makes later on.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty good way of resolving that. I was getting into my mind was getting into a knot trying to retranslate this. I was because nazar, I was thinking maybe like seeing, looking, vision, but it is consistently used in the text as a reference to speculation, to philosophical speculation.
Yeah.
Because then later he says though, and I was like, well, but yeah, he's talking about maybe a synthesis of the two.
Yeah, that's what because his project is, in that sense, it's completely platonic. A real philosopher is a lover of wisdom in the sense that they experience that wisdom through the Dhok, right? So he's also simultaneously trying to do in that statement is also trying to invalidate the Peripatetics as being philosophers from his own perspective, because they haven't made that leap from ratio to noesis.
Mhm.
Never
And
mind,
Mulasandra
never
picks up
mind the
on that.
fact that philosophers don't usually write philosophical allegories, which is another issue that I have with Wallbridge that tries to minimize this. Only mystic or mystically inclined philosophers write philosophical allegories like this that try to communicate their philosophy through that allegorical narrative rather than in a kind of a two-dimensional flatland kind of discourse.
Yeah, and I like the point. I like the point you made about the way the style and the structure of the narratives too, where he keeps doing this. He keeps putting stories within stories within stories.
Yeah.
It's like he's trying to say something just by that alone.
And so you have all these scenes, and these scenes, basically build on each other and reveal, the next element of the point or mystery that Suhrawardi is trying to disclose to us in that overall narrative structure.
Mm-hmm. Are these meant to be read in order, like this particular order, these recitals?
We don't know, because these were not found in some manuscripts have different ordering of this. So the ordering that Thaxton has done of these treatises is the one that you find in the Korban Nas text. I don't recall them justifying why they ordered it this way, other than the fact that the most reliable manuscripts that they used had ordered them this way. But they also mentioned that some of the other older manuscripts that they'd uncovered that had been, defective in certain areas of them had ordered the treatise in other ways. So this ordering is arbitrary.
Okay.
I mean, I have always read the Treatise of the Birds first, then I have gone to the very end and read the Tale of the Occidental Exile. Then I have come back and started with the other ones in the chronology that we're reading it now. So Tale of the Occidental Exile as the second has been my reading. Then I go to the Sound of Gabriel's one, read into a day with the Group of Sufis, and so on until the Seymour's Stroke Cry. Because I find the Tale of the Birds and the Tale of the Occidental Exile complement each other extremely well. And then once, I have grasped the argument of those two, then all the other ones start to kind of fit into their place. It just as sort of commentaries on the first treatise and the last one. That's been my method. Yeah.
Well, it does make the recital of the birds does seem like it should go first. It has that sense of like awakening you or orienting you right in the beginning. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure thing. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay. Tomorrow we come together, or
Siri,
you want to say something?
excuse me.
Yeah.
I will continue to torture you with.
No, no torture.
So, just to find. We were so detailed astronomer that we forget to ask about the last part, the practical suluk.
Yep.
So when he starts to explain about fasting and so on and so forth, I want to ask you about first about some phrases and then a more general question. The phrase little agreeable food, because this is ambiguous for me. Little food which is agreeable or food which you don't like at all.
Say that again.
The phrase, he says, go content yourself for 40 days with a little agreeable food,
Yeah.
which means that the food is agreeable, but little quantity,
Mhm.
or it should be not agreeable to
Okay.
you,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
which you don't like at all.
yeah, yeah, yeah. In a Khalwa situation, traditionally, when a Sufi was put into their 40-day retreat, usually their food was water and a few dates, usually one or two or three. Okay. What Suhrawardi is doing here is first putting that in, kind of in an elusive way, but then he's making a very, very interesting point in that the food you consume as the form of consumption is your own psyche. Okay. So in a retreat, when you go into a retreat, your whole fixation is to consume your own mind or the contents of the psychic elements of the mind. Nafs amara bil su. This is what you're consuming. And that is why he brings in the imagery of the dog who consumes its own feces regarding the person who does not succeed in this 40-day period. Because the excrement that he is instancing are these psychic residues. The bukh, for example, the miserliness, or hasad, jealousy, envy, etc. All these various negative contents of the psychic mind, right? And so then a retreat is positioning you to consume all of this in totality in a 40-day khalwa. If you succeed once, great. If you don't the first time, do it again. If you don't succeed again, do it one more time. If you keep doing it and nothing happens, then you are screwed. You're basically incapable of making that leap to the next level in order to then what? To experience what? What he says at the beginning of the tale of the Occidental exile, to experience the Tammat al-Kubra, the great overwhelming. So this consumption of the elements of the psyche, right? Which he then also then juxtaposes with actual shit, right? Is the most important thing that a Saleh can do. Once you consume those elements of the mind, of the psyche, only then can you have that experience of the great overwhelming that then takes you into the world of the Orient, where you become mujarrad from the bodily and the material senses, and you are operating completely by your noetic sensibilities. So first consume all of that. This is what the Sheikh is saying. Once you successfully consume, then that leap can happen into the noetic realm. Because once that is, he instances, the desires, your attachments, I put in family, all of these kinds of stuff, right? Once those attachments are consumed psychically and dissolved out of you, you are independent, you're sovereign. You have no quyud. It's like the birds that are being kept in the cages in the first treatise we read, and the bird whose feet are fettered in the second treatise that we read. These attachments act in that sense on the soul.
So here, does consumption, what does mean to consume them? In the process of halwa, to realize how low and useless are they.
Okay. That is the most important question that can be asked here. Why? Why is Suhrawardi using the imagery of consumption about this psychic? Very simple. The process of consumption is a kind of a dialectical process. You have hard matter that is met with acidity in the body that dissolves it. And in the dissolution of these elements of food, there is, the nutrients of the food, right, that are being dissolved then become the fuel of the body. So there's a sort of a very interesting, in the mind, in the psyche, the same sorts of things are happening. Jung entire cognitive psychological model very much is fixated on how this process works. So, for example, when he talks about the shadow, right? And he says things like, until you're conscious of the shadow, you will be the victim of what you think is fate. When in fact, it's actually your own psychological, process or psychic residue, which is like a mental excrement that is becoming a veil to the reality of your situation. So what does Jung recommend? Jung says that you cannot shun the shadow. You have to integrate it. You can't just say, I don't like it. Why? Because it's in your mind. You can't. So what you need to do is to get into this alchemical process, which is being sort of subtly indicated here, to dissolve the psychic residue and take its nutrients, right, that then are vanished within your subtle body, if you would, to then allow you that sovereignty to then elevate into the next level, such that those psychic residues no longer have any control over you. You have now completely become their master.
So once more time, this allegory are awesome.
I
Here,
know. It has it all. We have everything in. Yeah, the whole program are one by one in very symbolic allegorical language. They are set out in these treatises, each one of them. Yeah.
what I didn't get while I was reading the analogy between the psychic process and consumption of the
Yeah.
food,
Yeah.
because I was focusing only on the excrement, forgetting that we extract from the food
Yes.
the useful elements for our body. And here the same thing.
The same thing.
Something we should keep, but other to completely.
To act as a refuge. And this is why he brings up the dog who eats its own excrement for the people who have not succeeded in it, because they are attached to these psychic shells. I mean, Indian metaphysics, the school of Samkhya, has a lot to say about this process, right? Where they talk about the samskaras, these psychic residues in the body that need to be completely flushed out. The way they put it is that you have to completely burn through your karma. And this is what they're talking about. That you have to burn through these psychic imprints in your mind, and your astral body that the mind fuels, in order to then experience the true liberation. And for them, karma is not this kind of fatalistic thing. Karma is just basically cause and effect.
Okay, Sheikh, but does this mean that the fasting will be useless or very little effect if it is not coupled with halwa?
That's my reading, that without the chalwa, like, for example, or not even the chalwa in itself, but riyaza, fasting in itself, only works, in my opinion, when, number one, the mentality is there that you're working through stuff. In contemporary times, and probably the last 1,000 years, when people fast during Ramadan, it's a very culturally, ethnic, or even religious and institutional act. Very few people are using that, except the Sufis, are using that opportunity to process through things, right? Even though it is claimed that you want to get closer to God, right? Now, anyone who's fasted for prolonged periods of time, I've done fasting regimens that have gone, for example, for a long time. One of the most extreme fasting regimens I undertook was 11 days with water, eating nothing else, nothing at all for 11 days. You just drink water, but I was recommended, so that the glucose levels of my body don't drop too radically, that I was allowed 1 tablespoon of honey a day, right? And so that kind of balanced the body out, but the rest of the time, all I was doing was drinking water. Now, by the 5th day, once just the actual hunger becomes kind of flowers into something else. This entire psychic material of your mind just comes out full blast. You think you're going insane. Okay. So you're in that hunger stage, you keep your body hydrated with water as much as you can, but there is no food. There's no nourishment other than water and maybe that tablespoon of honey per day. So then the contents of the psyche open up. And if you are in a place where your space is protected and your mind is protected, right? That is a place where you can process. And that's where the real mujahida on even a visionary level begins, right? So all your conflicts and dislikes and hatreds and all of that thing just go boom right in front of you. And you're forced to deal with it. And it overwhelms you. And that is the place where you have to fight it out. And if you fight it out consciously, and then I'm telling you, it's not an easy process because you are already mentally and physically weak by the fact that there's no nourishment in the body other than water and a tablespoon of honey, right? So then your fight with yourself starts to look existential because you're coming at it from a place of weakness, that where you can actually be overwhelmed by these very psychic contents of your mind, right? And if you do this exercise a few times, each time you learn that, each time you get stronger at it because you have more experience from one time to the next. But what then this allows you to do is to integrate a lot of this residue and make it into the process that Suhrawardi is kind of alluding to, where you are digesting this psychic content. You're not eliminating it in the sense of like pushing it away. You're digesting it, right? So that whatever is positive about them as your mental experiences or whatever become absorbed into your psychic body and are no longer the fetters that are pulling you down. And according to Jung, that equates to confronting the shadow head on, right? And this is it's like fighting the devil.
Listening to all of this, it makes our Ramadan fasting just a caricature what is in the.
Well, but in one level, if you think about it, it is better to have something said to people, even though they're not following it in that kind of mind frame. If you didn't have it, right, this would give license to people to do even far worse. Okay, but from a Gnostic's perspective, the mere performance as a performative act of Ramadan is useless. And just remember, I've said this to people, I've said this to a few very exoteric mashayikh in the past. If the point of Ramadan is the qurba ila Allah, getting closer to God, right? Then when we have that hadith, now the Salafis and Wahhabis deny the authenticity of this hadith, but in some collections it's considered authentic. The one that Ibn Arabi also quotes, the hadith, man arafa nafsa faqad arafa rabbih, whosoever knows themselves knows their Lord. Then this sort of riyadha, right, is the process by which your Lord is known, to fight the own contents of your mind, right? And that knowing, once it occurs, is the ishraq, but the process of getting there is also, in a sense, the ishraq. Because when you're fighting against the psychic contents of your mind in the past and experience, it is as if there is a light illuminating on you. Now, this light might not be comfortable, it might not be pleasant because it's bringing up all your stuff out. The demons, shadows, everything just falls out of your head right in front of you and is overwhelming. I don't recommend these sorts of exercises for people unless they they're under the supervision of someone qualified, because it can, for certain people, trigger serious psychotic episodes. It takes a lot of self-will, extreme amount of discipline to get through from day one to the end of it. In fact, a khalwa, where you are actually receiving some very minimal nourishment, is, in my opinion, a much more salutary process of doing this, more controlled and slower. But once you go into like these 11-day water fasts, it's only water you're drinking with 1 tablespoon of honey. It can become quite traumatizing if you don't have that mental strength. Yeah.
This is little bit off topic, but I always wonder why such important details as diet, not to eat meat, and other thing are not given in the Sharia prescription, but it is just said from the morning to the night to abstain just for food without this important details.
I think part of the reason for that is it is very possible that some of these teachings in early Islam may have been initiatically motivated, and perhaps maybe 1 or 2 of the Sahaba, or if not them, then the Ahl Bayt, understood, because the Prophet had told them that this is what he did. And these are the sorts of experiences or optimum experiences that he derived while he was doing it. Because just remember, much of the fasting regimen that we have during Ramadan is also following an itinerary of the practice of the Prophet himself leading up to the experiences that he had on Mount Hira. He was known to retreat there for 20, 30 days at a time, not eating very much, until boom, that experience suddenly came to him. Right? So that is, I think, part of the explanation. And during the passage of time, as the religion was codified, this sort of thing was either expunged, or originally it was part of an oral teaching that was lost or transmitted secretly through certain lines. That's my view. Yeah.
And last question about the relapse when someone is unsuccessful. And this is, for me, it is always dilemma. Knowing you are going to take a serious path that have so many difficulties and dangers and so on,
Whoop.
will fail. So the relapse will happen and so on and so forth. But on the other side, the alternative is you are just sitting at your place without any advancement, which for me it is even a worse scenario than the relapse. So where is the golden middle between the two?
That's a very important question. It's a question I've also asked myself in various points in time. Look, change is a constant. Okay. The difference between someone who is on a path and is not having these dramatic individuation experiences versus someone who has a relapse are very different. One, because the person who has a relapse has not really completely expunged those dark elements from themselves. They may, and what my experience have been with, even with a lot of clients, is that when you give them some kind of a exercise to do, and they don't do it, or if they do it, they do it half-heartedly or something. What that tells me is that they are attached to those stories in their head. And this is a very real thing. Most people, even ones who are suffering from all kinds of delusions or all kinds of basic nafsi stuff, when you break it down, especially in therapy, when you break it down, they're attached to these things. It gives them their identity, their very raison d'etre of being. They can't let go of it, because to let go of that, or even to process it, not just let it go, but to process it in a very transformative setting, like a chalwa, means to strip themselves of their identity, right? I have even seen this process at various stages with myself, and I've had to, catch myself midway and try to, reframe that in my own head. Because what the lower mind, the animal mind of the human is doing is its entire instinct is about not just physical survival, but also mental survival and psychic survival. But an esoteric and a spiritual path is not interested in the psychic survival of a veiled being. It is there to transform it. What are the imagery we have? Annihilation. Or, Suhrawardi is the great overwhelming. That psychic mind doesn't want to have that experience. It scares it. It's like an animal that is, confronted by a bigger animal or a human with a gun or whatever, right? That's how the nafs al-amara thinks. So that is why it will fail, because it has fear. And so it needs to then go tackle this very issue that, brings it down through its fear of letting go or processing or confronting the shadow. Once that is resolved, only then it can then actually properly sit for a retreat and then confront the beast head on. And if it fails one, try it one more time. Next time, you're a little bit stronger than the last time, and it doesn't completely succeed the second time, try it again a third time. Inshallah, in the third attempt, you will get there.
Thank you very much, Saidi.
Sure thing. Sure thing. All right. Well, tomorrow we're coming together for Ibn Arabi. So whoever's coming to the session tomorrow, I'll see you then tomorrow. Those who are not coming until next week, let us read the state of childhood, Fi Halat Tufliya, which is the next treatise number 5. And until tomorrow or next week,